Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Flying High with Flutter. I'm your host, Alan Wyma. Today I'm with Kilian, the creator of Jasper. Kilian, how are you?
Yeah, cool. Hi, I'm fine. I'm Kilian. Yes, I've created Jasper. Jasper is a web framework written in Dart, so it's there to build websites and all kind of web apps and whatever in Dart. So yeah, that's very cool. So it kind of goes in the direction of Flutter Web, or like the idea started from like seeing Flutter Web, but as Flutter developers might know, Flutter Web isn't really built for any type of website. Like also the Flutter team itself clearly states that Flutter Web is more like for building web apps, and it has some certain use cases and stuff you can build with it, but not like general any purpose website, because it doesn't really use the normal HTML, CSS style of building websites. So that's where Jasper comes in. And yeah, it uses those normal web technologies. It renders normal HTML and CSS and so. But you can write it everything in Dart. And yeah, that's a short overview.
Now, so it sounds like you got started in using Dart from Flutter, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. I started like 3 years ago, I guess, with Flutter, on the mobile side first, and then just yeah wrote some apps in Flutter, some packages, and somewhere on the road, like I got into Flutter Web, or like seeing that you could use Flutter on the web, and tried around with it, built some stuff, but like also noticed the limitations Flutter Web had. Um, and yeah, and then somehow got the idea, or like just trying stuff out with rendering normal HTML with Dart, and then the idea came up to like make a framework out of it, because there wasn't really anything there that could do that. I mean, there are a couple of smaller other frameworks that do kind of similar things. There are also some, like there's Angular Dart, which is like a Angular part, like Angular JS part, for Dart, but it's not really, or like it was maintained by Google, but it isn't anymore. And right now it's, I think there are some maintainers, but it's not super active. So yeah, so, and also I started Jasper looking at server-side rendering, because there the possibility is really cool that you can use the same, or like use the same app on both the server and the front end, or like in the browser. And that's a pretty unique feature of Jasper, I think. I haven't seen it with other similar frameworks, Dart frameworks especially. Um, yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, there's not that many people using Dart on the mobile, or sorry, on the web front end besides in Flutter.
Hmm.
So I can understand why you'd want to look at something like that. Like you said, there's the Flutter Web. Can you really be a little bit more specific about the differences between the two? Because you already make it similar to Flutter Web, right? So when would I want to choose something like Flutter versus something like Jasper?
So the discussion that I see the most often is like people asking about how to do search engine optimization with Flutter Web. And the answer there is you don't most of the time, because Flutter Web, as I said, isn't meant to be this web framework that you can build any website with it, because it uses the Canvas API on web, so it draws pixels on the screen, but it doesn't use like the DOM, if you know it, like renders the HTML with like text and HTML text and meta text. So you wouldn't want to use it for something like a blog, or like in a web app with lots of text, or like a landing page or something like that, um, because it's really not meant for it. The thing about Jasper is, so I made it that it really feels like Flutter. So it has a very, like from a how you develop it, develop an application with it, it feels very much like Flutter because it has a similar structure, similar to the widget structure from Flutter, right? So in Flutter we have widgets that you can combine with stateful and stateless widgets and like build your app out of these parts. And in Jasper, it's very similar. You have components, which is just a renaming of widgets, but you have everything, the familiar parts. You have stateless and stateful components. You have inherited components, and like everything really just works the same on a surface level, which by design makes it so that if you come from Flutter and you want to get started with Jasper, you will feel very familiar and like you will know what's going on because you've seen that before, you've worked with it structure before, and it's just internally like inside the framework that it will do something different with those widgets or components than Flutter does. Yeah, so it's like internally it has a different technology, but it's really built so that especially Flutter developers can get easy started with it, and that was the main idea of behind building it mainly.
Well, not just that, right? I'm just going through the features over here as you're talking, and you already have server side rendering, which I think React has or is working on that, but they haven't actually released it yet, right? So you already have server side rendering out of the box.
There are, yeah. So like when you can, that's always the thing. You can either compare to Flutter Web, then and I've talked about that, or you can go ahead and compare it to like the other JavaScript frameworks that are out there, right? The web frameworks like React, Vue, I don't know, Svelte maybe. Um, and yeah, there you see it has some features that those also have. Like they work with some similar models. I think it's quite similar to React, but just because Flutter is also like from a structural standpoint quite similar to React. Um, yeah, and some of those frameworks also do server-side rendering. There are also other sub frameworks like Next that use then or that give you server-side rendering with like for example React. So you can also do server-side rendering with other frameworks. But with Jasper, it's just built in, and it's also like one of the core features or core ideas. So it's really like it's recommended to do server-side rendering with Jasper. Like it's not an afterthought with many of these solutions or like an additional feature on top, but it's really just one of the core features. You don't have to use server-side rendering with Jasper. You can just use it also as just a client-side rendering framework. Um, but I think the benefits of doing it are really good, and it's really like really easy to do.
That's interesting. But I just wanted to kind of make this part clear because actually, when I first saw the word framework, as somebody who's I do web development basically every single day. When I think about framework, I'm thinking like the entire stack where I can do, rendering, of course, HTML, server side rendering, but also producing APIs using JSON, right? But I don't think that's actually supported from Jasper, right? It's just basically just only creating like simple or not simple, but only creating web HTML apps. Is that right?
Yes. So Jasper is mainly concerned with like the rendering, the HTML rendering, either if it's on the server or on the browser. That's really the main purpose. Um, so you can, for example, if you use server-side rendering, if you like then have some Dart server app that you run Jasper with, it's actually supported to integrate Jasper in like some existing Dart backends. Like for example, Dart Frog is like a popular backend choice, and you can integrate Jasper with Dart Frog, for example, as just like then you have some routes that just render some HTML pages, but you can also have other routes that give you some API JSON data back or something. So yeah, so it's really just about the um, like the rendering output that it does. Not really to give you a complete backend framework, because there are other good frameworks out there.
Okay, so we could just say that this is Jasper is a strictly front end only framework, but of course includes some type of way to render server side if wanted, right?
Yeah, exactly. Like you could say front end only. I mean, it gets a bit difficult to say that because it renders also on the back end, but yeah, so it's really just about the rendering mainly. Either it's like front end or back end, but
I mean, that's a pretty big endeavor to get into, right? Is this your first time getting into making some type of front end framework like this?
so on that scale, definitely. Like I, I have some other, I maintain some other Dart packages, but those are not that big. And also when I started this, it wasn't like I didn't imagine it to get that big, both in terms of like features, but also in interest. I mean, it's still very early, and we haven't talked about that, but like it's still very early. It's on version 0.2. It's quite some way to being stable, so it's nothing that you should use in production right now. It's more like for people who are really into Dart and like are curious to try new technologies, and those I fully recommend, or like say go try it out. Um, but I guess it will take some time to get this to a point where it's stable and production ready. Yeah, so it's like really on that scale, it's a first time. It started as a yeah, just some small prototypes. I didn't know where it was going, and um, but then like people showed a lot of interest, and I just kept going, and it's steadily growing, and I'm trying to get the word out, trying to get people excited, people using it, and yeah, so I'm really eager to see where it can go, um, and yeah.
So, how long have you been working on Jasper for?
Um, so right now, I would say it's almost 1.5 years. So I started um, pretty much beginning last year, or even end of the year before. Um, but then I did the first, like the initial version 0.1, and after that I didn't have much time, so I had some months without much activity, and I only like recently end of last year started to get into it again. Um, so yeah, it's like um, about a year in development time, I would say, right now. Um, I mean, it's a pretty big endeavor, and I didn't anticipate it to be that big, but like there are lots of parts to it to get it to a point where it's really usable, and like has the features you would expect from such a framework. Um, especially they're like really um, small stuff, or yeah, difficult stuff to get right, or with the HL rendering, and with the um, like with the updates that it does. Like you want to update your app whenever something changes, as Flutter does. You will want to update it as efficiently as possible, and like modify the least amount of elements on the screen, and do the least amount of build cycles, and all that optimizing is yeah, pretty difficult to do sometimes, and takes a lot of time.
How does it actually work with the diffing, right? Are you using type of virtual DOM and doing a difference between the two, or are you copying off of what Flutter's doing, or how does it all work?
So some parts are actually copied or like taken over from Flutter. So you can think about it like this. So the widget tree is pretty much the same as in Flutter. The element tree that like is one layer below the widget tree is also pretty much the same. But then in Flutter after that, well, the layer below, we have the render objects for Flutter for rendering. Jasper doesn't have that. At that point, Jasper uses the DOM for rendering, right? So we have the widget tree, the element tree, and then Jasper does has like the DOM tree, or like whatever like that the browser supports natively, where Flutter would have the render objects. And so the diffing, like comparing the current state with the next state of the UI happens on the layers between like the element tree and then the DOM in the browser. Yeah, and then you just try to compare things that changed and try to update the DOM as efficient as possible with like the least amount of changes. Yeah, but that's also so the structure like on the widget tree level and on the element tree level is so similar to Flutter that actually also a choice that I did, and I think it's a very interesting point because it enables a lot of packages that you have with Flutter that use the widget tree to also more or less directly work with Jasper. So, for example, I did a Riverpod port to Jasper because Riverpod is a great example, right? You have the core Riverpod package that is pure Dart, like it doesn't have a dependency on Flutter. And then you have this the Flutter Riverpod package that just takes all the primitives that Riverpod has and like integrates it into the Flutter tree, mainly by giving you the consumer widget and the consumer stateful widget. And I could just take the Flutter Riverpod package, modify a bit so that it doesn't use the consumer widget, but instead like the Jasper components. But it was mostly just a pure syntactical adaptation of the package. I didn't have to really change the logic of it because all the widget tree and element tree is so similar. And you can do that with like pretty much every, for example, state management package that is out there that you could adapt very easily to Jasper. Things like you could do block and provider and all that things because Jasper just have the same primitives in terms of widgets and like inherited widgets and stuff like that. Yeah, that really enables the in terms of packages and ecosystem to look at the existing solutions for Flutter that are out there for different kinds of architectural and state management topics, and just take those and port them to Jasper without like reinventing the wheel.
I'm kind of curious about the name Jasper, right? What is where's the name come from?
It's the name of my dog, actually. I didn't had a better idea, so I just took the name of my dog, removed the E between the P and the R. So my dog is called Jasper, and yeah, I just took that, and somehow it stayed, and people seem to like it. Or yeah,
Okay, it makes sense because the logo has a dog in it, so now it makes much more sense now.
the logo is also still from the very early experimentations that I did. I just wanted to have some logo, and I just put like the face of my dog, put it in the colors of the Dart logo. And but yeah, I think that's gonna change at some point when it gets like more the whole setup gets maybe more professional, and I probably gonna remake the logo and like the whole how it's presented. But yeah.
Yeah, I'm just trying to follow. I'm looking at the Dart Frog, how this thing integrates between the two, because I'm trying to understand. Because I know that Dart Frog is not focusing. I mean, maybe things have changed since I took a look at it, but when I looked at it, Dart Frog was definitely not focusing on HTML. They're focusing only on API backends. So I was kind of curious about how you hook the two up together.
I mean, Dart Frog for me is just like a way to write your server endpoints, right? You just write some endpoints that get a request and return some sort of response. And that response can be JSON, but it can be just anything else. So I thought, why not make it an HTML response rendered by Jasper? The thing with like doing stuff like that is like when you open a web page, either server rendered or not, you will always have some additional assets that you have to use and load, especially like the client side JavaScript that you have to load, right? So the when you integrate Jasper with, for example, Dart it isn't enough to just return the HTML for a route. You also have to make sure that the all the assets, the JavaScript files, and also like your CSS files and so can also be loaded, right? So there are some additional parts to integrating these with some backend frameworks, so that when the browser goes back and like asks for the resources, they are also provided by the framework.
Yeah, you have to be able to point to those static files, right?
Yeah, exactly. Surprisingly challenging part to figure out that all the static files are also served correctly. Um, because without those you wouldn't, like, you could render some static HTML, but it wouldn't be interactive. You couldn't press any buttons or do something in the browser. Yeah, because all those files has to be pre compiled, right? Because um, you write the component logic. For example, you write a simple counter component with some button. You click it and counter increases. You write that as one component, and then you render it once on the server when you do server-side rendering. But you also have to compile it to JavaScript, like compile the Dart to JavaScript, and then serve it as a static asset, which means the compilation has to be like at the point where you build your application. You can't dynamically compile your Dart to JavaScript file. At least, like, this would be way too slow. So you have to do all that beforehand, compile all your Dart that you want to at some point run in the browser, have to compile it to JavaScript, and then ship those compiled JavaScript files as static assets. So there are some parts to the build step when you want to deploy such an application that were quite tricky to figure out, because especially when you have when you render some pages with Jasper, and you can, again, let's just imagine it would be Flutter. You have you take some components, some widgets, and those have some internal logic to either display widget A or widget B, right? But this logic is like executed when you request a page, or like when you load the app. But in order to pre-generate or pre-compile all those static assets, either those logic has to be pre-executed, or you have to basically take all the possible outcomes that a component has and compile all those possible then display components to JavaScript. So that's also one of the main difficulties or like challenges currently that Jasper has. That I wanted to be as dynamic and flexible and like Flutter-like as possible, but at some time, like currently, you have to define or like explicitly mark components that you at some point want to also have working on the client. So that's one of the limitations. Like, you can't just on the server render any component and expect it to also work then in the browser interactively. You have to mark it as like a component that should be also then compiled to JavaScript. Yeah, but that's like, it goes very, very deep into the technical stuff. I hope I could make it like quite clear also in the documentation to how you would do it. You would just annotate your component with like a custom annotation, and then all the stuff that I just talked about would be done automatically.
Yeah, I find it also interesting you have your own playground too. So you have like this inception or recursion kind of going on where Jasper can run Jasper, right?
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. So this was mainly supposed to be like a demo of how you write an application in Jasper. I basically took the source code of Dartpad, like the Dart online editor, and rewrote it in Jasper. So that's why also, like, if you go on it, it's jasperpad.schaltech.de. It will look like exactly almost the same as Dartpad, and that's because it takes all the styling and like how the layout is done from Dartpad, but just the internal logic is rewritten in Jasper. So it's both a showcase or like a demo in terms of how you write application with Jasper, but it also serves as then a digital an online editor for Jasper, because I modified the Dartpad internals to like the Jasper pad now to also work and compile and run Jasper apps. So you can also it's also a playground where you can just try out some Jasper code and look how it would be rendered.
One thing I'm kind of curious about is there how's the support with existing frameworks, right? Because it's kind of funny. I have a client right now, and we're trying to figure out how we can integrate some of our Flutter work into their existing JavaScript HTML application. We have a couple of issues, but we're going to be taking a look at it. Can you actually easily integrate, say, Jasper components into an existing JavaScript application? So maybe you can start to rewrite some components using Jasper rather than going 100% in.
I haven't actually looked at that in particular. I guess it would require some specific setup to do that, because like the components that you write with Jasper has to be compiled to JavaScript. So and then you have some JavaScript interop, which is almost like, or it goes in the same direction as with the Flutter Web interop, right? So like a couple of weeks ago, there was the presentation on Flutter Forward about the Flutter Web interop with JavaScript. And it goes in the same direction, right? You want to have your Dart code somehow communicate with some natively written JavaScript. So I think technically it's definitely possible. It's nothing I had in mind yet, or like I'm working on currently. But I see that, like now that you mention it, it could be a good starting point for people to, like, with some existing websites to add Jasper to like just some part of it.
Yeah, that's the way I see it because in my team we just have basically Flutter developers and a lot of people obviously have websites and we'd like to build those a little bit nicer. So when Flutter announced at Flutter Forward that you can start to export components basically, which is what I actually talked about with super declarative on a previous episode, I think Thanksgiving episode. I really wanted that because I want to be able to like make us a podcast player from my from my website because the podcast players available to me from my host is like not that nice. So that was something I really wanted to do, and now it may be possible, but it's still in experimental as far as I understand. But what they showed in the demo was pretty cool. Sorry, go ahead.
Especially because it's currently only on the Flutter master branch, so it's not in any shipped stable version or something. I think also, I'm not 100% sure, but I think it's also only works with Dart 3, but I'm not super sure on that. But also related to that, I actually made a example for Jasper to like do Flutter Web embedding with Jasper as the website part, right? Because for the demo they showed, they had the Flutter app and then some native JavaScript that communicates with Flutter. What I did was rewrite those native JavaScript and like normal website parts that they have in that demo, and rewrote that with Jasper, and it's now also working. And so that's definitely a possibility to do like interoperability between Jasper and other frameworks, either Flutter Web or like native other native web frameworks, or even normal manual JavaScript. Um, yeah, definitely a possibility. I think it's cool.
Yeah, because everybody has a bunch of stuff written already in JavaScript and HTML, so it'd be nice to be able to do that. The interop, I think, would be key. Um, now, is there? let me just ask it like this: is there a way that I could use some Flutter plugins in my Jasper applications, or is it strictly like it's impossible because they're really quite different? I mean, they may look similar, but they're really quite different.
Yeah, so short answer, probably not. So you can't really, so anything pretty much that has a dependency on Flutter, you won't really be able to use that with Jasper, because while it looks super similar and is like designed to feel familiar and like has the same structure, it's really a rewrite of those parts, and it works not with Flutter but like with its own rendering system. So yeah, you won't really be able to do that, especially all the like the widgets packages. Like if you have some widgets that are published as packages, unfortunately, you won't be able to use those. Um, yeah, as I said, though the packages that like are more about architecture, I don't know, dependency injection, state management, something like that. You could either use directly if they don't really depend on Flutter, or quite easily port them to Flutter, to Jasper. But yeah, like that's really unfortunate, but I don't think it also won't be possible in the future to use anything that really depends on Flutter directly with Jasper, because it's just so different. And adding this sort of support would just mean that Jasper uses all of its like unique advantages that it has, especially like with server-side rendering and something.
Yeah, that makes some sense. Uh, and so you the we talked a little bit about the integration, right? Because like that would be huge. Now, again, I mean, when I style stuff, I'm so used. The question still comes to mind, like, can I rely on existing CSS style sheets that I already have written for my app?
That definitely, right? Because like Jasper just renders HTML. You can, when you write your components in Jasper, you can say output a div and give it a class name, give it an ID or whatever, and then you can just use your normal CSS style sheets and refer to that element and style it. That's also what the Jasper pad demo does. It actually just takes the Dartpad style sheet. I didn't even copy it. I just referred to the Dartpad URL of the style sheet, and just redid all the DOM elements, rendered those with Jasper, but they just use the styles from Dartpad. Yeah, and there are also some people currently, I think, looking into stuff like doing Tailwind support for Jasper, that you can use Tailwind classes, and also on Jasper Pad, I have an example with Bulma CSS, which is like also a CSS framework, to use the styles and the components from this with Jasper. So yeah, in terms of like normal web technologies, or like also CSS stuff, it's really really good compatible with those.
Yeah, I'd be interested in the Tailwind one, especially if there's a way that you can run. Have you ever worked with Tailwind before?
Yes, but not that much.
Have you seen that they have like a JIT?
Um, you mean that the styles get purged that you don't use, right?
That, and it also will create styles upon reading your code too.
Oh no, that I haven't worked with. No.
Yeah, so one that you already know about is like it'll remove styles that you don't use, right?
Hmm.
That's one way. The other way is that you can dynamically create new classes by using square bracket syntax. So say you want like padding right of 2 pixel.
Hmm.
You could say PR dash and then left square bracket 2px right square bracket. It reads the PR, notices that's the pattern of padding right, and then grabs the value of 2px from inside the square brackets, and then we'll create that class with the value of padding right 2px.
Okay. And so it parses the HTML file, or does it also look at JavaScript or other files?
Yeah, it looks at there. It'll parse JavaScript. It'll parse HTML. It'll parse because it works with React. It works with it also works. So I use Elixir a lot for my backends, and they have a custom. You can just, I mean, similar to like JSX, they have this kind of customized thing, but you
Mm-hmm.
use like a, yeah, I don't know how to explain it, but they have a really custom way of creating the HTML within the code, similar to the JSX kind of style. And it'll read that too, and it sees the classes, and it's able to create those things automatically. And even like the prefixes, right? So there's like a print colon prefix. You can even create prefixes on the fly, and it'll just create what you want. It's really amazing. It's weird. It's like it's reading my mind
Mm-hmm.
because I created like a really goofy, like crazy prefix once, and I just made it up, and because I based on what I understood about the JIT, and it read it perfectly, and I was super surprised and very happy. I basically haven't written CSS for a long time because of the JIT. Like basically nearly most of it, like 95% of the CSS I need is already in Tailwind. That remaining 5% I can just make up on the fly. So I really never need to write CSS ever again. It's really nice.
Yeah, that sounds really cool. So yeah, I know that there are a lot of people that swear by Tailwind or like use it. So I'm definitely looking into to supporting it also, especially with those features that you just mentioned, so that you can create your own styles and combine, or like also like with the purging. It's probably, I would imagine it's probably not that simple because I don't know if there are integration with Dart yet, or what would be required to do that. I don't know yet, but I guess I'm definitely looking into it, and yeah.
Yeah, you got me curious. I know that, I mean, as far as I understand, these guys are trying to make this thing work for everything. I mean, it doesn't hurt to reach out and see if they're interested to help. I know that they do make a huge effort to try to get Tailwind out there.
Hmm.
So, I mean, worst case is they say no, but they may point you out and say, well, we can't help you with this, but we can point you out how to do it. Um, yeah, I mean, it's a huge endeavor, but I think the benefits are huge. Like I said, I love Tailwind so much just because I don't need to write CSS anymore. I could just write the classes.
Yeah, yeah, no, definitely. I guess there are not much people that really love writing CSS directly or like manually. Yeah,
Oh, well, the problem is keeping track of all your classes and knowing which ones you need still and which ones you can throw away.
especially, and I looked at that also with Jasper. Um, with Flutter, you more or less do your styling of your components directly in, or like where you define your components, because they just like take the container. It just has a bunch of properties how to style it. With CSS, you always have this separation, where you put your styles at one place and your layout, or like what elements you have on the other place, and you have to kind of keep track how those are linked, or like how those refer to each other. Um, so I'm also looking into a system to use, like how Flutter works, where you just put the styles of any component just directly into the component, um, and make it work with that, but then like internally again render normal CSS, um, and like split it up into separate style sheets. So then you would have the cool developer experience of like not having to manage different style sheets and like places where you put those, but still have the normal way of how it would be rendered in the browser in the end.
Now, I did see you running some benchmarks, right? Have you ever tried to run benchmarks, say, against React or some other popular frameworks to see what the speed difference is? Because I seen on here, I don't think I've seen React, but maybe I didn't read it properly for your benchmarks.
I think there is a React comparison in the benchmark. Yeah, like if you go on the GitHub and go to benchmarks, it's currently benchmarks against React, Angular, and another Dart framework. Um, yeah, I mean it's currently not on top of the performance scale, but I mean it's also still very early. So, but I'm quite happy with that it s- still kind of holds up. Like it's not super far behind. And yeah, I just did that also to have an idea about the rough performance of like, is it comparable? Is it super bad? Or I don't know. But it holds up pretty good, I think.
But you have a it's really weird. You have a column for vanilla JS, but there's no no values there. Is that just the benchmark or what is that?
Yeah, it didn't generate those correctly, I guess. I haven't looked at it. Yeah, no, it's just some generation error or something.
Yeah, you have this VJS, React VJS. The V means what? I didn't quite understand that part.
I don't know really. I just forked it from some other repository that did those and added Jasper as a column. So I didn't really look into how the others are work and what they are really.
Well, I also like that you worked on the testing part because that's something that not a lot of people care about these days is actually writing automated tests, right? I mean, I forgot to ask you about your background, right? What like how did you get started into programming?
Uh, I got started in the school, I guess. Like, we had some programming courses at school, and then when I finished, when I graduated, I started studying computer science. So I'm also currently still studying. Um, so I'm studying in Munich, and yeah, and then did some programming jobs during studies. I did also a year ago, like some freelancing work for Flutter. Right now, I'm at a company where I'm writing a Flutter app, and yeah, then I got like um, into the like the Flutter community, and like I built some packages some while ago and um, published them on pub.dev, and like steadily grew like attention to those and improved those, and yeah, I'm currently really just trying to get more familiar with the community, more into the community. I mean, I really like the openness and like how everybody is so nice and friendly in the community, especially with Flutter. And there's always so much going on, especially now when you look beyond just Flutter and like look at the broader Dart ecosystem with all these things popping up with Dart backends and Dart servers, and now the newest one is like the Dart Edge package, where I'm also experimenting with Jasper. Um, so there are like these edge functions, which are like super local serverless functions for running any like some code, and those are also really cool to experiment with and try around and like try to render some Jasper apps and pages. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, this is looking pretty cool. I like the fact that you're focusing on creating just plain HTML, CSS apps. It seems like we've lost. When I say we, I mean the community has kind of lost focus of doing that. We kind of just went all in on Flutter and forgot about what's the stuff actually that stuff that actually works and is not an issue at the moment, right? So I think the issue at the moment is like people are saying, "Oh, you got no SEO, you got the stuff, you don't have it."
Mhm.
Well, that's because you want to be able to create all these really how you call this very not so HTML natural kind of style. But sometimes you want to use Dart, you want to use the style of Flutter, but you also still want to make apps that are SEO compliant and actually look like and act like traditional HTML, CSS, JavaScript. So it's cool that you're working on this.
Yeah, I mean, Flutter is great. Flutter Web is great. I really enjoyed that they, on like during Flutter Forward, really positioned Flutter Web again very clearly. So like they said, really, Flutter Web isn't for everything, like in terms of websites. I mean, especially for Jasper, this is great because now don't feel like I'm not really a competition to Flutter Web, but more like yeah, like for a different purpose, really. Um, and maybe like especially with some stuff like embedding, Flutter Web embedding, you could use both on the same website depending on what you want to build. Yeah, and I just generally think Dart is such a great language. It has such potential in all different kind of areas. Why only focus on Flutter, or why only limit to Flutter while it can run on backend and all different kinds of applications. So yeah, and I like, for me, the one thing that I felt was still missing was really the front end web framework kind of stuff. So I built it.
Yeah, I like that attitude. I just want to say I agree. Like I feel like the the community like lost focus of Dart, and Dart is kind of a general purpose language. Which is kind of like it's like, well, if you do Dart, you definitely do Flutter and maybe do nothing else, which is I thought was very sad for Dart because I think that limits the possibilities that people even think about using Dart. When Dart, I mean, because of Dart, that's why we have Flutter, but it's not because Flutter, that's why we have Dart.
But yeah, Dart on itself is a great language for lots of great purposes. Where I don't restrict it to Flutter. Um, yeah. Also, like we could talk about maybe a bit about the what it means when you have Dart as a language for both like Flutter and backend, and then potentially your web frontend. In terms of like code sharing and sharing, yeah, different kinds of, like, you could share your models or some business logic, all between those applications without much of a hassle. Um, and like it's the same, um, I guess, advantages that people say about stuff like Dartfrog, like the backend framework, right? That you can just share code between your Flutter app and your backend written in Dart. And with Jasper, this goes even further to now you can share code between your website and your mobile app, um, and potentially other places where you use Dart. So that's also, yeah, in my feeling, a very strong point for it.
I'm glad to hear that you also think the same. Like I said, and I think that they the Dart and Flutter teams kind of also made it a little bit worse by bundling the two together. Right, when there's a new Flutter release, then usually have a new Dart release, and same the other way around. I mean, if I don't know, some people, I mean, it makes sense that that's the biggest use case for it, so you can bundle the two together. But then I feel like you kind of limit yourself. Dart can never be its own thing if that's the way you're going to use it. So, as somebody who does web stuff too, right? I mean, you've heard of SAS before. SAS is all written in Dart. So it's like not like there is bigger projects using Dart. It's just not so common to hear. And I'm just afraid that because we wrap it so much with Flutter that you're never going to see more.
Yeah, sometimes I feel like they could market Dart a bit more independent of Flutter, as you said. Yeah, yeah. So it's currently quite always Dart and Flutter together, like always in the same sentence. Not really looking at Dart as its own great language. Um, but also, like, to be fair, I feel that there is changing, like all the interest in Dart as a backend and on other kinds of apps, I think, is rising. There are more and more people interested in it and doing stuff with it. It may be also just because Flutter was so big that, like, in the beginning everyone just focused on Flutter, and maybe in a year or two this will have changed, or like hopefully.
Well, I also like the fact that um how do I say this? You also like um said, okay, there's nothing there that I'm looking for. Let me just roll up my sleeves and create it myself because that's not easy to do. Sometimes I get that idea, but I don't think never an idea like this where I build a whole framework and then have a have a dart pad like kind of thing and all this other stuff. So I really applaud you for that because that takes a lot of work and a lot of effort.
Yeah, I mean, in the beginning, that, like, this wasn't a really a plan to do it like that. In the beginning, it was just I just played around with some web stuff, or like Dart on web, and then tried to create some helpers that help me to easier write those websites in Dart, because if you, I mean, you could use the Dart HTML core library to just interact with the DOM manually, as people did, like, I don't know, 20 years ago with JavaScript. Um, but like that's nothing where you would build a scale, like a large scale website with. So I just, for myself in the beginning, tried to come up with some simple library that helped me, and then it kind of evolved into this big framework thing. Um, and yeah, but I really love it. I love that also that other people like it, and um, yeah, right now I really could see this becoming yeah, a lot bigger, and a lot more people using it. And I mean, that's great that it evolved so dynamically.
Now, what's left to make this production ready?
Yeah, it's a good question. Yeah, so I mean, I have a couple of to dos from the implementation standpoint. One big thing is like a good router. So it doesn't really have right now a super good routing solution. Like if you want to create multi-page websites like a blog again. Um, Stuff like that has to be done. Then of course like some improvements to like the testing system, some improvements to other parts, probably some performance improvements. Um, yeah, I guess a lot of work all over. I cannot, like, I don't have that one thing that has to be there. It just has to evolve, and then has to get a stable API. Um, yeah, I'm also like trying to add more examples with Jasper, so like that people know how to use it. Especially, I think a big topic is also how to deploy it, because it's not enough that you can just run it locally. You have to deploy it somewhere, and then comes the question: do you do server-side rendering, or do you do just a static site? And where do you host it? Do you host it on a cloud? On which cloud? How do you do it? Like there's a lot of questions I think that could still be answered and wrapped in examples and documentation, and that's also part of such a project, right? All the non coding stuff, or like not the core code of the framework, also has to be done, um, and is also a main factor of like to get people to use it, right? I mean, so that's why I also focused on, like, I think right now it still has, or it already has a pretty good documentation for like the state where it's in, because I always try to really be really up to date, and put effort in also the documentation and examples, and the testing package that comes with it, and the examples, the playground. I mean, of course, the playground was a lot of work, but in the end, I think it paid off, because people could very easily try it out, look at it. Like you wouldn't have to dig into the code to see how it could work. So it gets probably people easier access to the framework, and I think that's also important.
Yeah, I mean, I'm loving the work that you're doing. I hope that this continues on and becomes something bigger and takes on a life of its own.
Yeah, I hope that totally. Yeah, I mean that would be a dream to really um, like if this evolves to something that um, like kind of could stand on its own, or like be a full-time thing that I could do. That would be amazing, right? Um, so there's still a long road, I guess, to get it to a point like that, but it's heading in the direction, I guess.
That's great. And with that, I think we've run out of time, and we had a good introduction of Jasper. Is there anything that we should know about Jasper before we sign off?
I think I covered everything. So I hope. I mean, you can, like, it's on GitHub. Go to. I guess it's will be linked. You can look at it, play it out. Um, and yeah, just.
Now, if people wanted to get in touch with you, how can they contact with you?
Um, I've made myself Twitter very recently, so you can find me on Twitter under like Schultech_dev. Um, and you can reach out to me there. You can also just write an issue on GitHub if you have problems with Jasper. I'm quite active on GitHub itself. Like, yeah,
Awesome. Well, I really want to thank you for coming on and talking about Jasper. And again, I thank you for the work you're putting into it.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It was really great. What a lot of fun. Um, and yeah, always a cool opportunity to show people what you're doing.